Matching Arknights Freak has led us here, and you have read the title, so you know what's up. Operation Originium Dust, or the first siege event. No, not you siege. Yes, I have already made this quote-unquote Avena Victoria. Setting that aside, it's been over 3 years since this event originally ran, so let's ask the question, how does Operation Originium Dust hold up? And if you haven't seen it, the second siege event already has a video on this channel. Is it necessary watching? No, but I might spoil some of it here, so you have been warned. Ripping off the bandage early, I'm gonna say yes, Originium Dust does hold up. But despite my objectively correct opinion on all things, let's take a look at how this event does its thing. And there are a few different ways that we can look at it, from the gameplay, to the characters, to the lore, to the story, and of course, how it compares to Lucent Arrowhead. So the gameplay, or should I say one particular stage, technically I suppose two, cause as someone who read this event online, cause they missed the original run, I only got to experience this event's gameplay this rerun. And let's just say it, in terms of difficulty, I struggled with OD8 and ODEX8 way more than I did with CR8 in Lucent Arrowhead. I genuinely wonder how the players of the time clear this event without my beloved Reed Alter. This abomination, the essence of evolution. What an insane boss. Not unbeatable by any measure, but I most certainly failed this stage more than I did any in Lucent Arrowhead, including the challenge missions. So, at least in terms of difficulty, Originium Dust most certainly holds up. And as much as I'd love to jump straight to the lore and story, let's get some groundwork done before all that. Team Rainbow, a counter-terrorist organization, now isekai victims for our entertainment. Ash, Blitz, Frost, and of course, the Lord himself, Tachanka. Ash is our main character for this event, and goes through a rather rough transition from Earth life to Terra life. She favors a rather passive attitude for the majority of the event before the situation around her forces her to become more and more involved, leading to the conclusion of her character arc where she beats Drudge to a pulp, which by that point was a very welcome scene. Blitz and Frost are kinda just along for the ride. Not that they aren't interesting or cool in their own regard, but they receive way less character focus than Ash or Tachanka. And speaking of the Lord, he most certainly had my favorite character arc this event. Being the first member of Team Rainbow to discover the truth of the infected condition, he develops the closest relationship to the infected community that Team Rainbow seeks refuge in. This all culminates following the death of Myro, where he finally dedicates himself to protecting the home of the young infected. Rhodes Island of course makes an appearance this event, Franca, Liscorm, Swartz, and Rangers. Quite an interesting crew of characters I must say. 3 of the 4 of them even have unique sprites for this event, Swartz looking absolutely incredible in hers. And Liska and Francorm don't look too bad either. A very welcome addition to tie them closer to Team Rainbow with their designs. The remaining cast is a fairly mixed bag. Myro, a young infected doctor, is definitely the standout side character. He assists Team Rainbow while they attempt to survive the harsh world of Terra. This immediately makes him endearing, but his tragic fate during the event makes his character arc have a bittersweet but memorable conclusion. Picale, the young daughter of the Lord, is not so memorable, aside from being hot as fuck. She makes a late intro to this event and doesn't really do much aside from being captured by her brother. Speaking of, Drudge. This guy's a piece of work, hiring our antagonist Levi to create Originium mutants in order to take over his father's lands. He's pretty much irredeemably selfish and does eventually get what's coming to him. Levi is a mad Russian scientist, and his experiments using Originium are the driving force of this event. Having created a device to travel to Terra, he plans to use this unknown material to advance science to never before seen heights. For what reason, you ask? Science, of course. So, complicated villains aren't why you should look at this event. So, what's up with the lore of this event? Well, other than establishing the differences between Earth and Terra, this event actually served as an introduction to several different important pieces of lore. The infected are a pretty important piece of Arknights' lore. That should be a pretty mild take, not requiring any evidence to reinforce that one, I would hope. This event, despite being a collab, places an incredible amount of emphasis on the plight of the infected, probably as a way to highlight the differences between Earth and Terra. During this event, we get an in-depth look at infected life, from how one contracts infection, exposure to active Originium, to how one treats it with suppression medication, even what happens to an infected person after they pass away. They explode. Tachanka describes the natural inhabitants of Terra as being naturally trained in chemical warfare due to how they act around the infected. This event shows a slightly lighter side to the infected treatment as well. They are only isolated from all non-infected citizens. Not exactly cool being placed in a camp, but the lord of the area treats them fairly well, all things considered. I mean, it was his mine that caused oripity to become widespread, but unlike, say, in Casimir's, when he realized this, he shut his mind down. And considering he treated them fairly well, it wasn't the worst treatment possible. His daughter even kept them in their home when the infected citizens were threatened. This event also gave us our first look at an infected death on screen. The death of Dr. Myrow was captured with this on-screen CG. The curse of oripity not only robs one of their lives, but even in death causes them to potentially infect those around them, their bodies breaking down and exploding into a cloud of Originium. A violent end that awaits all the infected we have known. Rhodes Island, for its part, handles this through the use of incineration, but here a room with the entrances all covered was used in order to prevent spread. Another concept not necessarily unique to this event, but suddenly placed into focus, is the emphasis on firearms. The difference between Earth and Terran firearms are quite vast. One of course operates off a traditional firing mechanism, using gunpowder, etc, etc. I'm not a gun expert, go play Arma or something if you love guns. Terran firearms are described as being more like staffs than guns. Firing Originium etched bullets, the weapons rely on the arts control of the user, so it makes far more sense how weapons that require more extensive training than crossbows and swords to even use haven't become widespread on Terra like they have on Earth. Originium bombs are even more common than guns on Terra, not requiring any arts training to use. Now, firing what is essentially a chunk of Originium might sound easy, but messing up can easily result in you getting infected by misfire, which is why training is so important for all of those gun-wielding Terrans. Lastly, the most interesting piece of lore introduced in this event, the Foreign Hotlands. Situated to the south of Sorgan, the Hotlands are a massive uninhabitable desert, essentially the desert version of the Sami ice fields. The extreme heat of the region has driven all but the most capable out of its borders. Although it is really only mentioned in passing by rangers after Team Rainbow lies about where they came from, the Foreign Hotlands was the site of another great door, identical to the one in the northern ice fields, and was the site of a great battle between the Aslan and the Great Kagan, although that is a story for another video. Just know its introduction here in the first collab was a fantastic piece of world building that wasn't expanded on until long after this event finished. So in terms of the lore and its impact on the story, it most definitely is still relevant today. So the story is pretty straightforward. Team Rainbow gets isekai to Terra, spend 6 months struggling to survive, get caught up in a brother-sister succession crisis, kill a mad scientist, and join Rhodes Island, escaping the slowly collapsing narrative of Rainbow Six Siege in the process. Now, that is probably the highest level summary I could possibly give, so let's actually discuss it in a little more detail than that. Team Rainbow, led by Ash, launch an attack on the super secret evil villain lab in which Levi has been carrying out experiments. During the assault, Ella and Iana get separated from our main 4 characters, but Ash maintains the team's pace to stop Levi. They do successfully corner the man, but he activates his isekai machine and the 5 are transported to Terra, leaving Iana and Ella bewildered as to the sudden disappearance of their squad mates. Their time would come soon, however, just not yet. Following the whole isekai thing, Team Rainbow is stranded on Terra, miles away from where Levi ended up. Why? Well, the story couldn't happen if they just shot him right after showing up. And so the squad is left inside the remnants of the lab they were just in before coming under siege by metal crabs. As only Tachanka has armor-piercing rounds, putting them down wasn't exactly as easy as they hoped, but they managed. The whole situation makes them realize they might not be on Earth anymore, but with their safe haven breached, the team must take their chances in the deserts of Sargon. Thankfully, all of Terra's languages are essentially Earth languages, so communicating with the locals is possible. And after wandering for 6 months, they have taken up residence in Long Spring. During this time, they have picked up the basics of Terra, from the animal people to the magic arts. And while in Long Spring, they learn about the infected. Dr. Myrow, a resident of the infected area, has given them shelter in his clinic, and the team bond with him over their stay in Long Spring, especially Tachanka. During this time on Terra, Ash has maintained a stance of non-interference with the locals, as she really doesn't want to get involved in conflicts the team knows nothing about. But on Terra, the conflicts find you. Ignoring all that ominous build-up for now, a Rhodes Island team composed of Rangers, Swartz, Liscombe, and Franca are traveling the desert close by, aiming to return to the landship following their previous mission. However, before getting that lovely rest and recovery, they come across some mutated sand beasts. And following this encounter, they receive a distress call from a Rhodes Island outpost in Longspring. The outpost, and Longspring in general, has come under attack by Drudge. He has hired Levi to produce Originium mutants for him, or Originutants. In addition to this, mercenaries he has hired have been rounding up civilians and corpses for Levi's experiments. So Team Rainbow gets involved when the mercenaries come knocking at the infected district. All is looking okay for Team Rainbow, having guns and all, until the Originutants show up, and they realize they may need a better base than a rundown doctor's clinic. So Team Rainbow travels to the Rhodes Island outpost to make use of their reinforced base of operations. Team Rainbow makes good use of all the weapons they find stored at the outpost to fend off the mercenaries and the mutants, holding out until Rhodes Island arrives. The two teams together manage to protect all the infected civilians after joining forces. Their temporary peace, however, comes to an abrupt end when Picale arrives. She, alongside a large group of soldiers, relieve Team Rainbow and Rhodes Island of the infected civilians, taking them with her to her manor. Due to her suspicions, however, Picale doesn't allow Rainbow or Rhodes Island to assist her, but she leaves them alone. Unfortunately for her, Drudge was biding his time, waiting to draw Picale out of the manor and ambushes her with mercenaries and mutants. Drudge is bitter that Picale was made their father's successor and plans to execute her to become the lord of the area. Luckily for Picale, however, Swartz followed her and attacked Drudge and his soldiers. Team Rainbow and the remaining Rhodes Island members also provide backup, driving Drudge and his soldiers away, but not before Dr. Myro is forced to sacrifice himself, detonating a weapon Drudge brought with him and completely disorienting all the mutants. During Myro's funeral, Ash and Tachanka find their motivation to defend Longspring and begin preparing their plan of attack on Drudge and Levi. Team Rainbow and Rhodes Island split into two separate groups, attackers and defenders. Our defenders distract the mutants, and our attackers go to take down Drudge. Rangers, Tachanka, Frost, Liscombe, and Picale take on the mutants as our defenders, while Ash, Blitz, and Swartz as our attackers go after Drudge. After being driven away following his unsuccessful assassination attempt on Picale, Drudge returns to Levi, demanding more mutants. Unfortunately for him, Levi is tired of Drudge and decides to turn him into one of his many experiments. Upon reaching the mines that Drudge is held up in, the attackers realize that the bunker that they got transported in has ended up here. So Ash is more motivated than ever to take down Levi. Shortly after arriving, the attackers encounter Drudge, and Ash is absolutely not letting him get a word in, and proceeds to beat him into unconsciousness. Blitz has to step in to stop her from outright killing him, so you know that beating was crazy. After arriving at the main lab, they discover that Levi has created the essence of evolution, that piece of shit boss. Unfortunately for Ash, she doesn't get to kill Levi, but the essence of evolution gets him anyway. The squad is unable to kill the creature, so instead they bury it by blowing up the lab. The defenders battling against the mutants were whittled down to just Rangers and Tachanka, with the rest being injured and forced to retreat. Tachanka and Rangers accept their fate, ready to be overrun by the mutants, but are saved by the timely arrival of a Rhodes Island elite operator, Stormeye, and the day is saved. Following the successful defense of Longspring, Rhodes Island and Team Rainbow are tanked by Picale. Being the good people that they are, they refuse any reward, wanting all of her resources to be dedicated to repairing the town. And thanks to their incredible performance, Team Rainbow was allowed to join Rhodes Island. However, they are still trapped with no way to return to Earth, but they make the most of their new lives and settle into life on Terra, searching for a way home. Like I said, a simple story, but simple doesn't always mean bad, and I do think it holds up quite well by being fairly streamlined, which is probably because this was when Arknights events were like 3 hours long instead of 10, but that's a different discussion. So, is it better than the brand new and shiny event, Lucent Arrowhead? Well, for starters, I have to say I did enjoy and like both events, but there must be a favorite, a glorious golden standard that all collabs Arknights has shall be measured against. One shall stand as the ultimate example of a collab event, and one shall fall as a failure which couldn't live up to expectations. Listen, I'm just going to skip the dramatics. Originium Dust is better than Lucent Arrowhead, in my opinion. I don't even really dislike Lucent Arrowhead. If anything, I prefer the side cast in that event. Techno, my beloved, please become playable. Overall, I just felt Originium Dust told a tighter and more coherent story than Lucent Arrowhead. The struggle of the artists of Docilis was compelling in its own right, but if you took out the siege operators, I don't think the story really changes. Aside from the funny interactions, which were great, the event, in my opinion, doesn't take full advantage of the collab to tell a unique story. The events of Originium Dust, however, absolutely could not have happened outside of the collab, with the effects of the people from Earth directly influencing the world of Terra, from Team Rainbow's protection of Longspring to Levi's creation of Originium mutants. The importance placed on both sides of the collab had way more emphasis in Originium Dust. From the introduction to new lore to its explanation of existing lore, Originium Dust left an impact on the story of Arknights, even if it's never referenced. Lucent Arrowhead, on the other hand, doesn't introduce much aside from the new operators. Like, pretty much everything else was already there. And I don't want to insult the art community or the politics of Bolivar, but they aren't quite on the level of the Foe and Hotlands in terms of world building. Character-wise, I would say both events are on a fairly even playing field. Ash, Tachanka, and Namirao are definitely the standouts in Originium Dust, with Tachanka arguably having the best character arc from both events. On the other hand, Ella, Reynolds, and Techno are great characters introduced in Lucent Arrowhead. Although, to be honest, Ella is kind of a retread of Ash, but I like her, so we'll give it a pass. Lucent Arrowhead definitely has the better antagonist though, thanks primarily to Reynolds actually having some character aside from being evil. Mateo is a nothing burger bum soldier dude, and honestly, Drudge and Levi aren't much to write home about either. Drudge and Levi are most certainly more hateable than Mateo and Reynolds though. Mateo is kind of just pathetic, and Reynolds is fairly sympathetic, so you don't get as much joy from watching them lose everything. Drudge and Levi, on the other hand, you get very excited when they get what's coming to them. A severe beating and being consumed by their own creation. Very cathartic after they have been tormenting innocent people this entire event. I'm very willing to admit this whole section might have just been me justifying the point of Originium Dust still being worth reading, but you are just going to have to make peace with that yourself. And I want to pass the question over to you. Originium Dust, does it hold up? Is it better than Lucent Arrowhead? Has it fallen off? And am I living in denial as I love our Lord and Savior Tachanka? Perhaps. Y'all be good people, and I will see you in the next one. No, but for real, why did they make Picale so hot and then never use her again in any story? Like, what the hell, Hippogriff? Free my woman from NPC jail.